of Euroschool. Students, there is no single explanation why in 1947 a separate predominantly Muslim Pakistan was created. The word Pakistan itself is a fabricated one. Historically, there was no Pakistani people. The Mughal emperors did not rule over a Muslim kingdom, but over an empire of Hindus, Muslims, and other religious groups as well. Thus, the emergence of Pakistan in 1947 does not represent the rebirth of some former Muslim nations. It represents rather the realization of an idea developed over the previously 20 years that the Muslim people of India formed a separate nation and therefore deserved an independent status of their own. This is not to suggest that the feeling of separatism of Indian Muslims is a development in the last few decades. Quite the contrary, regional, social and cultural differences had developed feelings of separateness long before the 20th century. But the idea that the Muslims could not survive on terms satisfactory to them, save in a separate nation, was of relatively recent origin. Now let's analyze the different factors that sowed the seeds of the feeling of insecurity amongst the Muslims. When the British came to India in the early 17th century, the dominant power in India, as we all know, was the Mughal dynasty. In order to trade in India, the representatives of the East India Company had to obtain grants from the local ruling viceroys of the Mughal kings. With some difficulty, especially as first the grants were secured, and thereafter the company's business expanded as the fortunes of Mughal kings rose and fell. With the death of Aurangzeb, the last of the powerful Mughal emperors, in 1707, the Mughal Empire began to decline, and the strong central power, which had created a fairly unified empire, especially in northern India, faded away. Under these circumstances, local kings, princes clashed as they attempted to consolidate as much power for themselves as possible. As a result, the East India Company entered the political picture as well. The continued success of their business enterprises depended upon the stable and permissive exercise of political power, and when such was not the case, they took measures to correct the situation. In 1753, the Nawab, Mughal ruler of Bengal, tried to limit the expansionist activities of the company. The result was a conflict known as the Battle of Plassey, when this Nawab was replaced by a more compliant one. An important step in the growth of the company's authority was taken in 1765, when Clive, the governor of Bengal, obtained from the Mughal emperor the right to collect taxes, whereby a fixed amount had to be paid by the collector to the emperor at Delhi, and the remainder would be kept by the collector. Clearly, the company was acquiring the degree of authority necessary to carry on their business, rather than seize power outrightly. By 1800s, it was evident that the conflict between the Hindus and the Muslim rulers, which had developed with the decay of the Mughal strength, was to end, with neither of them as victors. No local power was capable of stemming the growth of British control. The loss of sovereignty by Muslim rulers. The British then finally established their absolute rule over the Indian peninsula when they dethroned the Muslim rulers. Since the Mughal throne had a symbolic importance and emotional value for the common Muslims of India, it was seen as an attack on the Muslim identity itself. As a result, the Muslims became bitter critics of the British rule and vigorously participated in the 1857 rebellion. The British, in response, persecuted the Muslims after quelling the rebellion. However, after 1817, there was a sea change in the attitude, as there was a realization amongst the British that dividing the Hindus and the Muslims was necessary to quell the rising tide of nationalism in India. As a result, the colonial government adopted a policy of appeasement. Appeasement means basically favoring one person over the other, or one country over the other, or one community over the other. So the British followed a policy of appeasement towards the Muslims and encouraged and promoted them in order to establish their own political organizations. The British policy of divide and rule. In order to maintain their hold over India, the British government began to follow their infamous policy of divide and rule. We go back to the year 1871, where the government adopted a resolution which made Urdu the medium of instruction for Muslims in primary and secondary schools, and they increased the aid to the Muslim educational institutions. This was clearly done to appease one community over the other. The Muslim rulers were portrayed as plunderers and the Hindu rulers as cruel to their Muslim subjects. The partition of Bengal was also publicized as a move in the interest of the Muslims. The caste and religious fault lines were magnified on purpose through press, posters, literature. And communal leaders were accepted as authentic representatives of the community. This was all done in order to sow the seeds of dissension, to quell the growing tide of nationalism in India. Now we have to understand that why did the Muslim community fall for this trick of the British? We have to understand it by analyzing the relative backwardness of the Muslim community. The communal and separatist thinking grew amongst the Muslims because of their relative backwardness in education, trade, and industry. The Parda system, the system of education was addressed through the madrasas, where learning the Quran was given primary importance. Science, technology, spirit of inquiry, scientific temper was discouraged. And because of lack of education, it had a ripple effect. Because of education, lack of education, they could not take the white-collar jobs. Because they could not take the white-collar jobs, they were poor. Because they were poor, they could not have a good standard of living. Because they were poor, there was lack of initiative in trade and industry. Another reason was the hostility of the upper-class Muslim zamindars and aristocrats towards the British. Because it is because of the British that the aristocrats and the zamindars lost their source of income. They lost their position in society. So they looked upon the British as threat. So anything that the British did, whether it was in the form of education or incentive for trade and industry, was looked upon with suspicion. So they remained aloof from the modern Western education. Again, since the British also regarded them as responsible for 1857, the British also did not give a lot of encouragement to the Muslims to participate in the mainstream education or mainstream trade. The Muslims were not very involved in the growth of any organized industry and did not take advantage of Western education, which was like a ticket to enter into government services. As a result, they did not get influenced with liberalism like the Hindus did much earlier due to their participation in the education system. Reason which led to the establishment, or rather encouraged the formation of the Muslim League, was the indifferent attitude of the Congress towards the Muslims. There is no denying of the fact that the All India National Congress was a predominantly Hindu body. Its interests were always at odd ends to those of the Muslims. That is what they believed. The prediction of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan proved to be the fact that Muslims and Hindus are two different nations, have two different ideologies. The Muslims of India were greatly disappointed by the anti-Muslim stance that the Congress seems to have adopted. So by 1906, the Muslim leaders were convinced that they had to have their own political party which may speak for the community and safeguard their interests. The legacy of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan is a complicated one. He was a loyal servant of the British administration before the revolt of 1857. He even penned a pamphlet titled The Cause of the Indian Revolt to explain the reasons of the revolt from a native perspective. However, witnessing the near annihilation of the Muslim elite prompted Sir Syed Ahmad Khan to take up the cause of Muslims, and his lifelong journey as an Islamic reformer and educationist is a testament of his dedication. Post-revolt, I was not disappointed by the looting of my house or the loss of my belongings, but I was most disturbed due to the ruination of my qualm. He initially thought of leaving the country but decided to give it up later. I gave up the idea of migration and decided to struggle for the rebuilding of my qawm. Born on 17th October 1817 to a wealthy family that was close to the Mughal court, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan wore many hats: civil servant, journalist, historian. However, he is first and foremost known for his pioneering work in transforming the educational opportunities for Muslims. He recognized that education is the most important tool through which the Muslims could emerge from a position of disadvantage and compete with Hindus, especially Bengali Hindus who were at the pinnacle of the political scene at that time. The ALIGARH movement. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan is best known for the ALIGARH movement, a systematic movement aimed at reforming the social, political, and educational aspects of the Muslim community. He founded the Scientific Society in 1863 to translate major works in the sciences and modern arts into Urdu. He released two journals to this end: the ALIGARH Institute Gazette, which was an organ of Scientific Society, and the Muhammad Social Reformer in English. Khan's notable contribution in the field of education is establishing the university in Aligarh, known as the Aligarh Muslim University, a premier educational institute of the country. He attempted to model the colleges on universities such as Oxford and Cambridge. His work on Muslim education was not limited to this alone. He wanted to create a network of educational institutions managed by Muslims and founded an All India Muslim Educational Conference. In 1886, he set up the Muhammad Anglo-Oriental Educational Congress and later renamed the Muhammad Anglo-Oriental Educational Conference to bring about education and culture.